The hospital's night shift had begun to settle into its usual rhythm. The overhead lights cast a sterile glow over the long, white-tiled corridors, where the muted hum of machines blended with the distant chatter of medical staff. The scent of antiseptic was a constant companion, mingling with the low murmurs of conversations behind closed doors. Sarah, a dedicated nurse known for her calm under pressure, was making her rounds. Her steps echoed softly against the linoleum floor, a steady beat in the otherwise quiet atmosphere. Suddenly, the tranquility was shattered by the shrill ring of the emergency bell. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she sprinted toward the source of the alarm. In the chaos of the emergency room, a team of doctors and nurses rushed to attend to a new arrival. A young man, pale and barely conscious, was wheeled in on a stretcher. His name was Daniel. The flurry of activity around Daniel was intense. The medical team moved with practiced precision, assessing his vital signs and prepping him for immediate intervention. Sarah joined the effort, her eyes focused on the young man's face, which was twisted in pain. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it. As she worked swiftly, inserting in-4 and checking his vitals, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she knew this man from somewhere. Her hands moved with expertise, but her mind was elsewhere, grappling with an uneasy sense of recognition. Daniel's breathing was labored, his eyes fluttering as if fighting against a heavy veil of unconsciousness. The emergency room's bright lights seemed to magnify the urgency of the situation. Sarah's colleagues, Dr. Evans and Dr. Morales, barked out orders, their voices sharp and commanding. Despite their professionalism, the gravity of the situation was evident. Daniel's condition was critical, and every second counted. Sarah's focus remained unbroken, her face a mask of concentration. As she adjusted the 4-drip, she glanced at Daniel's medical chart, hoping for a clue to the strange sense of familiarity she felt. The chart provided little solace, listing only basic information: age, weight, and symptoms. There was nothing that explained why Daniel's face seemed to resonate with her so deeply. The team moved Daniel to the operating room, and Sarah followed, her heart pounding in her chest. As the doors to the operating theater closed behind them, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She needed to stay focused. There was no room for distraction in the world of emergency medicine. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the team worked tirelessly to stabilize Daniel. Sarah observed, her mind racing through a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Each beep of the heart monitor, each gasp from the patient, was a reminder of the fragility of life. When the operation finally concluded, Daniel was moved to the intensive care unit for monitoring. Sarah, though exhausted, could not shake the feeling that this was more than just another case. There was something deeply personal about this emergency, something that connected her to Daniel in a way she couldn't yet understand. As Sarah prepared to leave the ICU, she took one last look at Daniel, now lying still and unconscious but stable. A flicker of something, a memory perhaps, passed through her mind. She couldn't quite grasp it, but she knew one thing for certain. This was not going to be a typical night shift. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped out of the ICU, the door closing behind her with a soft whoosh. The quiet of the hospital seemed to envelop her once more, but her thoughts were anything but calm. She had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something profound and challenging. The night continued its slow march forward, but for Sarah, it had already changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The connection she felt to Daniel lingered in her mind as she moved through the empty halls, each step echoing the uncertainty and anticipation of what was to come. The sterile light of the ICU was a constant hum as Sarah made her rounds the next morning. The night had been long and restless, with the echoes of beeping monitors and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat accompanying her every step. Though her fatigue was palpable, she moved with a practiced grace, ensuring each patient received the care they needed. As she approached Daniel's bed, now surrounded by a tangle of medical tubes and monitors, a familiar pang of unease gripped her. His condition had stabilized overnight, but Sarah's curiosity about him had only intensified. She pulled a chair closer and reviewed his chart again, searching for clues that might explain her disquiet. The chart revealed basic details. Daniel, 29, admitted with severe trauma after a car accident. The information was standard, but Sarah felt an inexplicable pull to learn more. It wasn't just his physical condition that intrigued her. It was something about his presence, a sense of familiarity that gnawed at the edges of her memory. As she prepared to check his vitals, Daniel's eyes fluttered open. They were a deep brown, filled with a mix of confusion and pain. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as their gazes met. For a moment, the world outside the ICU seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of them in a suspended reality. "Daniel," Sarah spoke gently, her voice a soft balm in the tense atmosphere. "How are you feeling?" Daniel's voice was a mere whisper, strained but clear. I feel disoriented. Everything hurts." Sarah nodded, trying to mask her own swirling emotions. "I'm here to help you. Just focus on getting better. Okay?" As she adjusted the 4 and checked his monitor, Sarah's mind raced. The more she looked at Daniel, the more she was convinced she knew him from somewhere. It was as if a foggy memory was just out of reach, teasing her with its proximity. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that elusive sense of recognition. Daniel's breathing grew steadier, and as the minutes passed, Sarah found herself engaging in quiet conversation with him. He spoke of his recent days, mentioning mundane details of work and life that seemed ordinary yet oddly familiar. Sarah listened intently, her professional demeanor masking the internal struggle to place him in her memory. During one of their conversations, Daniel mentioned a childhood friend named Emily. The name struck a chord in Sarah's mind, stirring a long-buried recollection. She remembered an Emily from her own past, a friend she had lost touch with years ago. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. As the shift wore on, Sarah could not shake the feeling that there was more to Daniel's story. She decided to take a brief break and called her colleague, Julia, to cover for her. Stepping outside the ICU, she took a deep breath of the cooler air, trying to clear her head. Sitting in the small staff lounge, Sarah pulled out her phone and began to search for information about Daniel's background. She hoped to find something that would either confirm her suspicions or dispel them. The more she searched, the more she realized how little she actually knew about Daniel, yet the connection felt undeniable. Returning to the ICU, Sarah approached Daniel's bed with renewed resolve. She needed to understand why his presence was affecting her so deeply. Her heart raced with a mix of anticipation and anxiety as she resumed her duties, determined to uncover the mystery that seemed to intertwine their lives. As she checked his charts and adjusted his medication, Daniel's eyes met hers again. This time, there was a hint of recognition in his gaze, as if he, too, was trying to place her. The unspoken connection between them grew stronger, like an invisible thread drawing them closer. In the stillness of the ICU, with the soft beeping of machines and the gentle hum of air conditioning, Sarah felt a profound sense of purpose. She knew that uncovering the truth about their connection was more than just a personal curiosity. It was a crucial part of her journey, one that would shape the rest of their lives. With a final glance at Daniel's sleeping form, Sarah prepared to continue her shift, the mystery of their connection pressing heavily on her mind. The day ahead promised more challenges, but she was now driven by a deeper, more personal mission. The morning shift had brought a flurry of activity, but nothing could shake Sarah's focus from Daniel. The soft, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a constant reminder of his fragile state, and every slight fluctuation in his vitals seemed to echo in her mind. Despite the busy environment of the hospital, her thoughts were consumed by the young man in the ICU. As Sarah reviewed Daniel's latest test results, her mind raced. He was stable for now, but the doctors had warned that his condition was precarious. The next few hours would be critical. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she handled the paperwork, her anxiety growing with each passing moment. She had always prided herself on maintaining professional distance, but Daniel's case was different. His presence, his familiarity was a constant, gnawing distraction. Dr. Evans, the head physician, approached Sarah with a serious expression. "Sarah, we need to discuss Daniel's treatment plan. We've got a few options, but we need to act fast." What are your thoughts? Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of determination and hesitation. I've been reviewing his condition, and I believe we need to be cautious. His vitals are improving, but we should consider the long-term effects of any intervention. Dr. Evans nodded, but his expression remained stern. We don't have the luxury of time. If we don't take decisive action, his chances of recovery could decrease rapidly. We need a solid plan, and we need it now. Sarah's heart raced. The weight of the decision before her was immense. She knew that her input was crucial, but the emotional connection she felt with Daniel made it difficult to separate her personal feelings from the medical facts. She struggled with the notion of making a decision that could potentially impact his life so profoundly. As Sarah walked back to Daniel's room, she tried to focus on the facts. The medical charts, the test results, these were the tools she relied on to make objective decisions. Yet, as she glanced at Daniel, asleep and vulnerable, the data seemed to blur. Her personal connection with him complicated her ability to think clearly. The emotional turmoil she felt was palpable. She recalled her own struggles, her own battles with illness and the challenges of balancing professional and personal life. The memories of her own past vulnerabilities made it hard for her to distance herself from Daniel's plight. Each beeping monitor, each labored breath from Daniel seemed to mirror her own fears and insecurities. As she administered medication and adjusted the foredrip, Sarah couldn't help but think of how her decisions could influence his future. She felt the crushing responsibility of her role, knowing that every choice she made would have lasting implications. The internal conflict was exhausting, a constant tug-of-war between her professional duty and personal empathy. The door to Daniel's room opened, and Julia, one of her colleagues, stepped in. "How's he doing?" Julia asked, her voice a comforting presence in the tense atmosphere. Sarah managed a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "He's stable for now, but we need to be careful with the next steps. Dr. Evans wants us to decide on a treatment plan soon." Julia nodded understandingly, sensing the weight of Sarah's dilemma. "If you need to talk it through, I'm here. Sometimes it helps to get a second perspective." Sarah appreciated the offer but was hesitant to burden Julia with her personal struggle. "Thanks, Julia. I'll think about it." The day dragged on, and Sarah continued her rounds with a heavy heart. She grappled with the knowledge that her decision could mean the difference between life and death for Daniel. Each interaction with him seemed to draw her deeper into the emotional quagmire, making it harder to maintain the clear, rational mindset required for her job. As the shift neared its end, Sarah took one last look at Daniel. His condition was stable, but the weight of the decisions that lay ahead was almost unbearable. The professional mask she wore felt increasingly strained, and the emotional conflict was far from resolved. With a sigh, she walked away from the ICU, the echo of her footsteps mingling with the soft beeping of the monitors. The night was approaching, and with it, the inevitable need to confront her own emotional dilemma once again. The hospital was quieter in the late afternoon, with only the low hum of machinery and the occasional distant clatter breaking the calm. Sarah sat at the small desk in the nurse's station, her eyes fixed on Daniel's medical chart. The details she had reviewed countless times before now seemed to blur together, overshadowed by the nagging sensation that she was missing something crucial. As she flipped through the pages, a sudden knock on the door broke her concentration. Dr. Evans walked in, his face etched with concern. "Sarah, we need to discuss Daniel's case. Have you found any additional information?" Sarah glanced up, her thoughts racing. "I've been going through his records, but there's something off. I can't quite put my finger on it, but he seems so familiar. It's as if I know him from somewhere." Dr. Evans raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Have you considered reaching out to his family or friends for more background? Sometimes personal connections can offer insights we might not get from medical records alone." The suggestion struck Sarah like a revelation. She realized that seeking out Daniel's personal connections might not only provide useful information but could also help her resolve the troubling sense of familiarity she felt. With a nod, she thanked Dr. Evans and set off to find more information about Daniel's past. As she walked through the bustling hospital corridors, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. She wondered if contacting Daniel's family might shed light on the connection she felt. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became that there was a deeper link between them. She approached the hospital's administrative office and requested to access Daniel's emergency contact information. After a brief wait, she was handed a slip of paper with a phone number and a name: Emily Thompson. The name rang a bell, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the same name that had triggered her earlier recollection. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah dialed the number on the slip. The phone rang several times before a voice answered. "Hello. Hi. My name is Sarah. I'm a nurse at the hospital where Daniel Thompson is being treated. I was hoping to speak with you about him," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line before the voice responded. "I'm Emily. How is Daniel? Is he okay?" Emily's voice was filled with concern, and Sarah could sense the depth of their connection. "Daniel is stable for now, but we're still evaluating his condition. I wanted to ask you a few questions that might help us with his treatment." As Emily began to share details about Daniel's life and background, Sarah listened intently, piecing together fragments of a story that seemed increasingly familiar. Emily spoke of Daniel's childhood, his dreams, and the recent challenges he had faced. Each revelation seemed to align with Sarah's own fragmented memories. Emily mentioned that Daniel had recently reconnected with an old friend named Sarah, who had been a significant part of his life before moving away. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the connection. Emily was referring to herself. The memories of their shared past came flooding back, days of laughter, shared secrets, and a friendship that had been abruptly severed by life's circumstances. Sarah thanked Emily for the information and ended the call, her mind reeling. The revelation that she and Daniel had known each other as children was both shocking and overwhelming. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the full picture remained elusive. With newfound determination, Sarah returned to Daniel's room. As she entered, she took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. The connection she felt was now grounded in a tangible reality, but she had to navigate the complex web of past and present with care. She approached Daniel's bedside, the weight of their shared history adding a new layer to her resolve. The realization that Daniel was someone from her past, someone she had lost touch with and now found herself caring for in the most critical of circumstances, intensified her sense of responsibility. As she adjusted his for and checked his vitals, Sarah glanced at Daniel's face, now relaxed in sleep. The familiarity was bittersweet, mingling with a deep sense of nostalgia and responsibility. She knew that understanding their past connection would be crucial to navigating the emotional and medical challenges ahead. With a heavy heart and a clear sense of purpose, Sarah prepared for the next phase of Daniel's treatment, knowing that their shared history was more than just a coincidence. The journey ahead would be fraught with emotional complexity, but she was ready to face it head-on. The past had resurfaced, intertwining with the present in ways she could no longer ignore. The sterile atmosphere of the hospital seemed even more oppressive as the days passed. The rhythm of the beeping monitors was a constant reminder of the precarious situation Daniel was in. Sarah had spent countless hours by his side, grappling with the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. Her emotions were tangled in a web of professional duty and personal connection, and the strain was beginning to show. The medical team had gathered for a meeting in the conference room, the air thick with tension. Sarah walked in, her mind a flurry of conflicting thoughts. The room was filled with the murmur of voices discussing Daniel's case, but as she took her seat, she felt a sense of isolation. The stakes were high, and every choice mattered. Dr. Evans looked up as Sarah entered, his expression serious. "Sarah, we're at a critical juncture. We need to finalize the treatment plan for Daniel. What are your thoughts?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. The emotional turmoil she had been experiencing now took center stage. Her professional training told her to focus solely on the medical data, but her personal connection to Daniel made it impossible to separate the two. She had already seen how delicate his condition was, and now she had to weigh the options with a clear mind. As the team discussed the potential treatment plans, each with its own risks and benefits, Sarah felt the weight of their decisions pressing down on her. One option involved a high-risk surgery that could offer a chance at full recovery but came with significant potential for complications. The other was a conservative approach that would stabilize Daniel but might leave him with long-term health issues. The discussion grew heated as opinions were voiced and countered. Dr. Evans and the other specialists debated the merits of each approach, but Sarah found it hard to focus on their arguments. Her thoughts were consumed by the memories of her childhood friendship with Daniel, and the responsibility she felt for him now was overwhelming. As the meeting continued, Sarah's mind drifted back to her conversations with Emily. She recalled Emily's hopes and fears, her own memories of Daniel, and the lingering sense of connection that had been reignited. Every detail seemed to pull her in different directions, and the complexity of the decision weighed heavily on her. Finally, the meeting quieted down, and all eyes turned to Sarah. "We need your input," Dr. Evans said, his tone neutral but expectant. Sarah hesitated, her gaze fixed on the floor as she collected her thoughts. The room seemed to close in on her, the silence amplifying her internal struggle. She knew that whatever decision she made would not only affect Daniel's future, but also shape her own life in ways she couldn't yet predict. With a deep breath, Sarah spoke up, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Based on the information we have and the conversations I've had with Daniel's family, I believe we should proceed with the conservative treatment approach. It's less risky, and while it might lead to long-term issues, it gives Daniel a better chance to recover without the immediate threat of complications." Dr. Evans regarded her with a mixture of respect and concern. "Are you sure about this? It's a significant decision, and we need to be certain." Sarah nodded, meeting his gaze with a resolve that surprised even her. "Yes, I'm sure. We need to give Daniel the best chance to recover without adding unnecessary risks. It's a difficult choice, but I believe it's the right one." The meeting ended with a consensus to proceed with Sarah's recommendation. As the team dispersed, Sarah felt a profound sense of relief and trepidation. The decision had been made, but the emotional weight of it lingered. Returning to Daniel's room, Sarah's steps were heavy with the burden of her choice. She approached his bedside and adjusted his blankets, her heart aching as she looked at his peaceful face. The past had intertwined with the present in ways she hadn't anticipated, and now she faced the reality of her decision. As she sat by his bed, the quiet of the room enveloped her. She felt both a deep sense of responsibility and a flicker of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but Sarah was determined to navigate it with as much care and compassion as she could muster. The next steps would be crucial, and Sarah knew that the road to recovery would be long and challenging. But with the difficult decision made, she was ready to face whatever came next, guided by her sense of duty and the enduring connection she felt with Daniel. The journey was far from over, but the course had been set. The early morning hours at the hospital were shrouded in a quiet intensity, punctuated only by the occasional footstep echoing down the corridors. Sarah had arrived before the sun, her thoughts consumed by the decisions that lay ahead. Her earlier choice regarding Daniel's treatment had set the stage for the next phase of his care, but the weight of that decision was beginning to manifest in new and unexpected ways. As Sarah entered the ICU, she was greeted by the familiar hum of machinery and the soft murmur of conversations between the medical staff. The team had assembled for their daily briefing, and the air was thick with anticipation. Today, the focus would be on implementing the treatment plan Sarah had advocated for, but there was an underlying tension that she couldn't ignore. Dr. Evans was already at the head of the conference table, his expression serious as he reviewed Daniel's charts. Sarah took her seat, trying to ignore the apprehensive glances of her colleagues. She knew that her decision had not been universally accepted, and the pressure from her team was palpable. Dr. Evans cleared his throat and addressed the room. "We're moving forward with the conservative treatment plan for Daniel. I want to ensure everyone is on the same page and fully understands the implications." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but Sarah could sense the undercurrent of dissent. Dr. Hughes, a senior surgeon known for his straightforward manner, spoke up. "Sarah, I understand your concerns about the risks associated with the surgery, but have we fully considered the long-term impact of the conservative approach? It might stabilize Daniel now, but we could be setting him up for future complications. The question was direct and pointed, and Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She had anticipated scrutiny, but the forcefulness of Dr. Hughes' challenge was more than she had expected. She met his gaze, determined to stand by her decision. "I've weighed the risks and benefits carefully," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "The conservative approach minimizes immediate risks and gives Daniel a better chance to recover without the complications that the surgery might bring." Dr. Evans nodded, signaling his agreement with Sarah's viewpoint, but the tension in the room lingered. The team's discomfort was evident, and Sarah could sense the pressure mounting. The decision was not just about medical protocols. It had become a matter of professional and personal stakes for everyone involved. As the meeting continued, Sarah's thoughts drifted back to her interactions with Daniel's family. Emily's hopes and fears had added a personal dimension to the decision, making it even more difficult to navigate the team's expectations. Each member of the team had their own perspective, and while Sarah respected their expertise, she felt an increasing burden to justify her choices. After the briefing, Sarah retreated to the nurse's station, her mind racing. The pressure from her colleagues weighed heavily, and the quiet of the early morning hours seemed to amplify her doubts. The team's expectations were not just a professional challenge. They were personal, reflecting the complex dynamics of their relationships and responsibilities. Julia, a fellow nurse and one of Sarah's closest friends, approached her with a concerned look. "You seemed pretty tense in there. Everything okay?" Sarah forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a lot of pressure. I'm standing by the conservative treatment plan, but the team is not exactly thrilled with the decision." Julia's expression softened. "You made the call based on what you felt was best for Daniel. It's not easy being the one to make those tough decisions. If you need to talk it out or just need some support, I'm here." The kindness in Julia's voice was a small comfort amidst the mounting pressure. Sarah took a deep breath, appreciating the support, but still feeling the weight of her responsibility. She knew that the treatment plan was only the beginning, and the real challenge lay in seeing it through to its conclusion. As the day progressed, Sarah continued to monitor Daniel's condition closely. The pressure from her team was a constant presence, but her focus remained on his well-being. Each adjustment to his treatment was a reminder of the stakes involved and the importance of every decision. The hours passed in a blur of activity, and as evening approached, Sarah found a moment of solitude in the quiet of the ICU. The pressure from the team was unrelenting, but her resolve was unwavering. She had made her decision, and now it was up to her to navigate the complexities of the treatment with the same dedication and care she had always brought to her work. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah adjusted Daniel's medications and checked his vitals. The day had been challenging, but she was determined to move forward with the treatment plan she believed in. The pressure was intense, but Sarah was ready to face it, guided by her commitment to Daniel's recovery and the knowledge that every choice she made would shape his future. The hospital corridors were bathed in the soft light of dawn as Sarah moved through them with a sense of urgency. The previous days had been a whirlwind of activity and stress, but today, an almost tangible sense of foreboding hung in the air. The pressure to see Daniel's condition improve had reached a fever pitch, and with it came the fear of an impending crisis. The ICU was already bustling when Sarah arrived. The clamor of alarms and the hurried footsteps of medical staff created a chaotic symphony that matched the turmoil within her. She approached Daniel's room with a sinking feeling, her heart racing with the knowledge that something was amiss. As Sarah entered, she was met with a scene of frantic activity. Daniel's monitor was beeping erratically, and a cluster of doctors and nurses hovered around his bed. Dr. Evans looked up, his face lined with concern. "Sarah, you need to see this." Sarah's stomach twisted as she moved closer. Daniel's condition had deteriorated rapidly overnight, and the conservative treatment plan she had championed seemed to be failing. The sight of his fluctuating vitals and the anxious expressions of the medical team was a stark contrast to the hope they had once shared. Dr. Hughes was already in the middle of an assessment, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "His blood pressure is dropping, and there are signs of internal bleeding. We need to act quickly." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process the information. The conservative approach was intended to avoid complications. Yet here they were facing an emergency that threatened Daniel's life. She felt a pang of guilt and anxiety, her confidence in her decision faltering. "Isn't there something we can do immediately?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Evans glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "We're considering all options, but at this point we might need to reassess our approach. We're running out of time." The tension in the room was palpable, each second ticking away as they worked to stabilize Daniel. Sarah felt as if the walls were closing in on her. The choice she had made, which had seemed so clear-cut, now felt like a heavy burden. As the team worked tirelessly, Sarah stepped back to clear her head. The corridor outside Daniel's room was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos within. She leaned against the wall, her mind racing with questions and doubts. Had she made the wrong decision? Was there still a chance to save Daniel? Julia, who had been nearby, approached with a worried expression. "Sarah, how's he doing?" Sarah looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and determination. "His condition is worsening. We might have to rethink our approach. I just don't know what to do." Julia placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're doing everything you can. We're all in this together. Just take a moment to breathe and think clearly." Sarah took a deep breath, drawing strength from Julia's words. She knew that despite the pressure and the uncertainty, she had to remain focused. The situation was dire, but panic would only cloud her judgment. After a few minutes, Sarah returned to Daniel's room. The team had managed to stabilize him temporarily, but the situation remained critical. Dr. Evans and Dr. Hughes were engaged in a heated discussion about the next steps, their voices blending with the sounds of beeping monitors and hushed tones. Dr. Evans looked at Sarah, his expression resolute. "We need to make a decision now. We have to consider a surgical intervention." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. The breaking point had arrived, and the decision she had to make now was fraught with consequences. The conservative treatment plan was no longer viable, and the only option left was to take a risk that could either save or further jeopardize Daniel's life. With a deep breath, Sarah addressed the team. "Let's proceed with the surgery. It's the best chance we have to address the complications and give Daniel a fighting chance." The room fell silent as the decision was made. The team sprang into action, preparing for the surgical procedure. Sarah watched as Daniel was wheeled away, her heart heavy with apprehension and hope. The breaking point had been reached, and the outcome now hinged on the delicate balance of medical intervention and Daniel's resilience. As the team prepared for the surgery, Sarah remained on the edge of the operating room, her thoughts consumed by the gravity of the situation. The pressure of the past days had culminated in this pivotal moment, and she knew that whatever happened next would shape the course of Daniel's recovery and her own future. The battle was far from over, but Sarah was determined to see it through, guided by her commitment to Daniel and the hope that the decisions made in this crucible of crisis would ultimately lead to a path of recovery. The sterile, cold light of the operating room cast long shadows on the walls as Sarah paced nervously outside. The hum of machinery and the occasional clink of metal instruments punctuated the otherwise tense silence. The decision to proceed with surgery had been swift, but the uncertainty of the outcome was weighing heavily on her shoulders. Sarah had barely had time to process the gravity of the situation before the surgery began. Each minute ticked by agonizingly slowly. She had been informed of every step taken in the operating room, but the information was sparse and cryptic. The usual chatter and reassurances from the team were absent, replaced by a palpable tension that was impossible to ignore. Julia joined Sarah, her face reflecting the same anxiety. "How are you holding up?" Sarah managed a thin smile, though her eyes betrayed her worry. "It's been intense. The team's been working hard, but I can't shake the feeling that something's not right." As if on cue, the doors to the operating room swung open, and Dr. Evans emerged, his expression grave. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she approached him, her breath catching in her throat. "Dr. Evans, how is he?" she asked urgently. Dr. Evans looked at her with a mixture of relief and concern. "We've encountered an unexpected complication. We need to talk." Sarah's pulse quickened as she followed him to a quieter corner of the hospital. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. "What happened?" Dr. Evans took a deep breath, his gaze meeting Sarah's. "During the surgery, we discovered something unusual. It appears that the source of Daniel's internal bleeding was not what we originally thought. There's a secondary issue we hadn't anticipated. An old injury from years ago that had gone unnoticed." Sarah's mind raced. An old injury? How could they have missed something so critical? What does this mean for his recovery? Dr. Evans's expression was somber. "It means that the situation is more complex than we realized. We've addressed the immediate problem, but the long-term implications are uncertain. We need to reassess our treatment plan moving forward." As Sarah absorbed the news, she felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. The very foundation of her decisions had been shaken by this new revelation. The path forward was now obscured by a fog of uncertainty, and the burden of navigating it weighed heavily on her. The implications of the new complication rippled through Sarah's thoughts. She recalled the initial discussions about Daniel's condition and the subsequent decisions she had made based on the available information. The twist in the situation had not only affected Daniel's immediate treatment but had also placed Sarah at a crossroads in her professional judgment. Julia's voice broke through Sarah's reverie. "So, what happens next?" Sarah turned to her friend, trying to find a glimmer of clarity amidst the confusion. "We need to gather more information and reassess our strategy. This new complication changes everything." As Sarah and Julia walked back toward the ICU, Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The initial decision to opt for conservative treatment had seemed like the best course of action, but the new twist had introduced a level of complexity that was both unexpected and daunting. The journey ahead was fraught with challenges, and the plot twist had added a new layer of urgency to Daniel's care. Sarah was determined to face the new reality head-on, but the road was now marked with unforeseen obstacles and a heightened sense of responsibility. Entering the ICU, Sarah found herself once again surrounded by the bustling activity of the medical team. The focus had shifted, but the stakes remained as high as ever. The new complication required a delicate balance of medical expertise and compassionate care. As the team began to regroup and formulate a revised treatment plan, Sarah remained at the forefront, her resolve unwavering despite the storm of uncertainty. The plot twist had altered the trajectory of Daniel's recovery, but Sarah was committed to navigating the complexities with the same dedication and care that had guided her from the beginning. With each passing moment, Sarah felt the weight of the new challenge settle over her. The journey was far from over, and the path ahead was now marked by unexpected turns and difficult decisions. But amidst the chaos and the pressure, Sarah knew that her commitment to Daniel's well-being would be the compass guiding her through the storm. The sterile chill of the hospital seemed to seep into Sarah's bones as she walked down the dimly lit corridor. The gravity of the past few days weighed heavily on her shoulders, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights only seemed to amplify her sense of isolation. The unexpected twist in Daniel's case had left her with a daunting choice: to continue with the revised conservative treatment or to opt for a more aggressive approach that came with its own risks. Sarah reached the small conference room where Dr. Evans and Dr. Hughes awaited her. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a table and a few chairs, but it felt like a battleground of medical decisions. The air was thick with anticipation as Sarah took her seat at the head of the table, facing her colleagues. Dr. Evans began without preamble, his expression a mix of professional detachment and concern. "We've reviewed the new data and discussed the potential outcomes. The situation is critical, and our options are limited." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with the implications of each choice. The aggressive treatment had the potential to address the underlying issue but came with significant risks. The conservative approach, while safer, might not be enough to fully resolve Daniel's condition. The stakes were as high as they had ever been, and the weight of responsibility felt almost unbearable. Dr. Hughes continued, "The aggressive treatment could provide a better long-term outcome, but it also carries a high risk of complications. It's a gamble, and we need to consider whether the potential benefits outweigh the risks. The silence that followed was punctuated only by the distant sounds of the hospital. An ambulance siren, the chatter of staff, and the distant beeping of medical equipment. Sarah's thoughts swirled around the potential consequences of each decision. Her mind flashed back to Daniel's initial diagnosis, the choices she had made, and the unforeseen twist that had thrown everything into disarray. Julia, who had been quietly observing, spoke up with a gentle yet firm tone. "Sarah, what does your gut tell you?" Sarah glanced at Julia, appreciating the question even though she had spent hours grappling with the rational and emotional aspects of the decision. "My gut tells me that we have to take a chance. If we don't act decisively, we might end up with worse outcomes. But I'm also deeply aware of the risks involved." Dr. Evans leaned forward, his gaze steady. "The decision is yours, Sarah. We will support whichever path you choose, but we need to act quickly. Every moment counts." The weight of their words settled heavily on Sarah. She felt the enormity of the choice pressing down on her, as if the fate of Daniel's recovery rested entirely in her hands. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and determination, each scenario playing out with vivid clarity. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She imagined Daniel vulnerable and in need of the best chance at recovery. She saw the faces of his family, their hope and fear intertwined. The reality of their situation brought her back to the present moment, and she knew she had to make a choice that aligned with her commitment to Daniel's well-being. With renewed resolve, Sarah opened her eyes and met the gazes of her colleagues. "We're going with the aggressive treatment. It's the best chance we have to address the underlying issue. We'll take every precaution and prepare for potential complications, but I believe it's the right course of action." Dr. Evans and Dr. Hughes exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. "Very well," Dr. Evans said. "We'll proceed with the plan. I'll make the necessary arrangements for the treatment." As the medical team mobilized to put the plan into action, Sarah felt a sense of cautious optimism. The final decision had been made, and now it was time to see it through. The uncertainty remained, but Sarah's commitment to doing everything in her power to help Daniel was unwavering. Julia placed a supportive hand on Sarah's shoulder, offering a reassuring squeeze. "You made the right choice. We're all behind you." Sarah nodded, grateful for Julia's support. The next steps were critical, and the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for now, the decision had been made, and Sarah was ready to face whatever came next with determination and hope. As she prepared to rejoin the team and oversee the implementation of the new treatment plan, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The final decision had set the course for Daniel's recovery, and the journey ahead would be guided by a blend of medical expertise and steadfast commitment. The early morning light filtered softly through the blinds of the hospital room, casting a warm glow over the scene. The once sterile environment now seemed imbued with a sense of calm. Sarah stood by the window, gazing out at the city as it slowly came to life. The weight of the past weeks had lifted, but the journey was far from over. Daniel's condition had stabilized significantly since the aggressive treatment had begun. The new approach had brought a mixture of relief and caution. The surgery was a success, and the complications were being managed with careful precision. It was a turning point, but the final outcome was still uncertain. Each day was a small victory, and Sarah clung to the hope that recovery would continue on this positive trajectory. As she turned from the window, Sarah's gaze fell upon Daniel, now resting peacefully. The resilience of his spirit was evident even in his sleep. His family, who had been a constant presence, were now resting in the chairs beside him. Their exhaustion mingled with a tentative hope. Julia entered the room quietly, her presence a comforting reminder of the support Sarah had throughout this journey. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. Sarah offered a weary smile. "It's been intense, but seeing Daniel stable is a huge relief. We've come a long way, but I know we still have a ways to go." Julia nodded, understanding the depth of Sarah's emotions. "It's been a roller coaster, but you've done everything you could. Sometimes it's just about taking it one step at a time." The door opened, and Dr. Evans walked in, his expression one of cautious optimism. "Good morning, Sarah. I wanted to update you on Daniel's progress." Sarah moved closer to him, eager for any news. "How is he doing?" Dr. Evans glanced at Daniel before meeting Sarah's eyes. "He's responding well to the treatment. The risk of complications is being managed, and we're cautiously optimistic about his recovery. The next few days will be crucial, but for now, things look promising." A sense of relief washed over Sarah, mingling with the lingering uncertainty. The road ahead was still filled with potential challenges, but the progress made was a testament to the hard work and dedication of everyone involved. As the morning wore on, Sarah reflected on the journey she had been through. The decision-making, the unexpected twists, and the emotional strain had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Yet, through it all, she had found a strength she didn't know she possessed. The support of her colleagues, the encouragement from Julia, and the resilience of Daniel had all played a crucial role in guiding her through. Julia and Sarah sat together, sharing a quiet moment of reflection. "You know," Julia said softly, "it's moments like these that remind us why we do what we do. It's about making a difference, no matter how challenging the journey." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It's been a tough road, but seeing the impact we've made, even in small ways, is worth it." The room was filled with a sense of hopeful anticipation as Sarah and Julia continued their conversation. The challenges faced had forged a deep bond between them, and their shared experiences had strengthened their commitment to their work and to each other. As the day drew to a close, Sarah took a final look at Daniel, still resting peacefully. The journey was far from over, but the progress made was a beacon of hope. She knew that each day brought new possibilities, and that the path ahead would be shaped by the resilience and determination that had carried her through. With a deep breath, Sarah prepared to face the next chapter, whatever it might bring. The resolution of Daniel's immediate crisis had provided a moment of reflection and renewal. The challenges of the past weeks had brought profound lessons and a renewed sense of purpose. As she left the room, Sarah felt a renewed commitment to her work and an appreciation for the strength found in the midst of adversity. The story was not just about the resolution of a single case, but about the journey of growth, resilience, and the unwavering commitment to making a difference. And with that understanding, Sarah stepped forward into the future, ready to face whatever came next with the same dedication and hope that had guided her through the storm. Click on the video being recommended to you now.